welcome to Elements of Ayurveda, Empowering Wisdom of Life. I'm your host, Colette, and in this podcast, I hope to empower you to take charge of your own health by sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition from India. We will also discuss topics like health and wellness, nutrition, yoga, fitness, meditation, breath work, and much more, as well as interviewing lots of inspiring people along the way. My humble wish is to help you to connect to your true nature, to Mother Nature, and to each other. If you like the content, be sure to subscribe to the show, and the new episodes will automatically download for you to enjoy. If you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend you listen to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. I've also set up a Facebook group for us to connect and to support each other, and I'd love for you to join me over at Elements of Ayurveda podcast group. And now, here's the show. Hello, and welcome to Elements of Ayurveda. Today, I have the lovely Amy with me. Hi, Amy.
Good morning, or good afternoon in your case.
Voila, yes, good afternoon here. The sun has set. And today we want to talk about resistance to healing, which is something that I'm sure, like me, Amy, you come up against a lot in our work.
Yes, I would say resistance to healing and lack of compliance are two of the major obstacles when you are a yoga therapist trying to help someone heal themselves.
Yeah, and it's so hard to watch people sabotage their healing or have resistance when you know how yoga and Ayurveda could help them so much. And, you know, one of the biggest reasons is, or could be, our attachment to the suffering that we're in. And, you know, people can become attached to this identity of who they are. And a lot of times we have to have compassion for these people who are resisting this change, because it can be a lot of fear around letting go of this pain, or fear of change, or fear of the loss of control, or even who you might become when you're that healed person, because you're so attached to this identity of a person that's out of balance or has an illness or is suffering in some way. What do you think of that, Amy?
Yes. I mean, in the Yoga Sutra, they have one of the causes of suffering, one of the kleshas is called asmita. And it means you have identified with something as being you. So you've identified with your illness as being you. Your illness is not you, but you think it's you. And you get so wrapped up in the symptomology and, you know, even the causes and the medications and the treatments, that becomes the whole of who you are, instead of remembering that you are not your illness.
Mm-hmm. So true. And as Eckhart Tolle says in his book, A New Earth, which I love, this is really all about the ego, right? The ego is that false sense of self based on mental concepts, as Eckhart Tolle puts it, and an identification with something other than the true self.
That's asmita, straight out of the Yoga Sutra.
Voilà.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, when in this book, A New Earth, Eckhart says that you may speak of yourself as a sufferer of this or that chronic illness, and you may receive a lot of attention from doctors and other people who are constantly confirming to you your conceptual identity of being a sufferer or as a patient. And so unconsciously, you could cling to this illness because it has become an important part of who you are or who you perceive yourself to be. And it has become another thought form, or another identity that the ego can hold on to. And it's, you know, it can be quite a strong identity for the ego to hold on to, and it basically won't want to let go. So the ego is always in search of something, right, to hold itself in place. So it can often even create more illness or create more suffering in order to hold on to this identity with this illness or pain.
And there were two things that you said just now that really stood out to me. One is that you get attention for your illness. And, you know, if you're someone who has not been seen, has not been heard in this life, doesn't feel like you matter. And then suddenly you're sick and everyone's caring about you and worrying about you and how are you and do you feel any better? There's a lot of attention that can go with that for a while. I think eventually that even wears off and people are not that willing to hang out with a sick person. But there's also a reinforcement of that false identity when the people around you, especially healthcare providers, and that could be a medical doctor, a nurse, a nutritionist, and a yoga therapist, an Ayurvedic practitioner. I mean, we're in this too. When we start over-identifying with the disease or pathology and only give attention to that part of the human being instead of looking at the whole human being and saying, look, this is a part of you, but this is not you. And look at all these other areas of your being that are not ill and that are well, you know?
Yeah, so true that it is important to focus on the positive, as it were, and take the attention away from this this suffering or this identity, because when we talk about it a lot, when we're focused on it a lot, then not only is it a physical identity, but now it's becoming a mental identity too, which gives it even more power. So like you said, look at the other parts of yourself. This is only a small part of what's going on in your physiology, and look at the other positives and focus on the positives, and not to give this so much attention.
Yeah, I have a perfect example. Last summer, I was in Japan, and maybe a day or two before the trip, I tore my meniscus in an exercise class, and then running around Japan for several weeks with a big suitcase in the train. It was excruciating. Like I've never felt that kind of pain before. And what was interesting to me is that on one hand, I had this knee that had blown up to the size of a basketball. I was limping. I was hurting at night. But on all the other parts of me, my mind, my emotions, my spiritual connection, was having such a fabulous time. I was laughing and playing and just loving life and loving the connection with the other people on the trip. And I had both things happening at once. It's not that the laughter covered up the knee pain. I mean, it was always there. But I was able to focus on all the amazing, beautiful things that were happening and hold both together, the pain and the joy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And because you didn't totally associate with just pain, that you were able to have those experiences of joy as well.
Yeah, I mean, I considered going home. I considered letting them all go on their day trips and me sitting back at the hotel. And I couldn't. I just said, Amy, this is the experience of a lifetime. And you're here. Let's do this. Yeah, there's pain, but you have a life to live. So it was very interesting. I'm not sure I've ever held suffering and bliss simultaneously for 2 weeks. I actually felt like I went into an altered state of consciousness.
Really?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I think there was an acceptance of this is what is, this is how it's going to be for the next couple of weeks. You're not going to get surgery on your meniscus during this 2-week period. You've decided to stay. Let's accept the pain and sit and rest when you need to. But when you can, when you're capable, continue on.
That's very interesting. That's exactly what Eckhart was saying in the book, is accepting it. This is the way things are right now. And I feel the pain, but I'm not going to let it take over my whole day or my whole trip in your case.
Right. And, with chronic pain, I think that attitude becomes much more difficult because when it drags on for months and years, I can't even imagine. I mean, whew.
Yeah.
But I think that's the name of the game. And it's not just with knee pain. It's with a broken heart pain. It's with lack of spiritual faith pain because God isn't taking care of you the way you think he or she should. I think this ability to hold those opposites and breathe through it and be present, it is transformational and it takes you to a higher plane of consciousness.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if you are someone who's suffering from chronic pain, yes, of course, it's there on a daily basis. And how do you begin to reconcile with that constant pain? But like you said, that if there is an acceptance of it, that this is here to teach me something, but also that perhaps that's only talking about it when you're talking to your doctor or your practitioner or whoever you're seeing, and trying not to let it take over your life. So you're not talking about it all the time and this doesn't become who you are.
Right. I think there's this fine line between getting the self-care that you need and getting the professional help that you need. You don't want to be in denial. You don't want to not take care of yourself. But once you've done your self-care for the day, your dinacharya in the morning, maybe your bath and your oil and some yoga and a good breakfast and some hot water, once you have done that self-care, now we have to be with what is and move into our day and take on whatever's approaching.
Right, because if it does, in fact, take over your identity, if we think about it, what is it doing to your body? What is it doing to all the other systems of your body if you're letting something like this consume you? And the effect must be so huge on your body. In particular, I'm thinking about the rasa, which, the juice of life that comes from our digested food that permeates the whole body. And if there are feelings of anger or resentment or bitterness towards this condition you have, I believe that will permeate the whole body within that rasa.
That's a very interesting concept. I really like it a lot.
Yeah, because if you think that if we go back to just the very basics of anything we eat, takes on our emotions, right? Food particles will be emotionally charged. So if we're consumed with this identity of suffering and illness, and again, we have all this bitterness, this resentment, and fear, whatever the feelings, are, that is going to be charged in the food particles, which then breaks down and goes around the whole body within the rasa.
You're even making me think of the chronic stress that we're all under. That when we eat in our car and eat on the run and eat between appointments and we're stressed out and we're stuck in our sympathetic nervous system, to eat in that state would do the same thing to the rasa and be circulated around inappropriately.
Oh, absolutely. And this is why stress is a huge factor in a lot of the diseases today.
Right.
Because the body is under stress, it's permeating the body within the rasa, and that the systems of the body are going, we don't know what's going on out there, but there is some major stuff going down, and we need to shut down, fertility, we need to shut down reproduction, we need to shut down digestion, and so healing, and so on, if the body feels it's under threat. Because the body doesn't know what's going on the outside. It's taking the information from the senses, and the senses are overloaded and overstimulated in our world today with social media, with, like you said, eating on the go, multitasking. We could go on forever, and a list of how we're overstimulated. And the body's getting the information from the senses. And so the body's going, wait, now what is going on out there? Let's take control here. Let's shut down the functions and the systems of the body that are not needed for survival and just, keep the status quo.
Right. And I think this is why so many cultures stop before they eat and say grace or do a chant or do 12 breaths of pranayama. They do this to take us out of our sympathetic, to draw sympathetic nervous system, to draw the senses inward and drop into your parasympathetic nervous system where you can rest and digest your food.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's key. Just that saying grace over your food, taking time to just sit with your food, be mindful. It's all really about awareness and bringing yourself to the present moment. Awareness is the key to getting away from the ego, getting away from that attachment, because when we're in the present moment, the ego can't survive. And all that is required is to become free of the ego is to be aware.
I'm gonna just paraphrase what you said back because it's so critical. That to be in the present moment, the ego cannot survive. The ego wants to have us thinking and complaining about our past. Mm-hmm. It wants to create anxiety about the future and what might happen. Mm-hmm. But it really doesn't have much to do when we are fully aware and present. And taking it back to something like chronic pain, that's what's required, is that present moment interoception, or feeling your body from the inside out and breathing into it and feeling it, and having acceptance of what is at any given moment. And it's really interesting. You would think that focusing on it would make it worse. But a lot of times it actually dissipates because the pain is screaming out, wanting to be heard. And you finally listen and say, I'm paying attention. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll settle down then. I got your attention.
It's so true. And that often happens. It's just the body is giving you these messages for you to pay attention. Right. And when we're not giving the body the attention, it will scream louder. Because how many times do we hear, people have these subtle signals of imbalance, but they ignore them and then they go on further. And a lot of times it takes life or an illness to stop you, knock you off your feet, literally, before a lot of people will pay attention.
Well, and I think you've talked about this, and I know it's happened in my body and my mind and my spirit, that I do ignore the subtle signs. Mm-hmm. Even though I have a daily yoga and meditation practice, somehow I miss the internal signals saying, hey, you're out of balance. You don't feel well. I just keep pushing through. And so that's one thing I wanted to talk about today is, why is it that we just keep pushing? I can't tell you how many people I work with that I try to help them have more interoception and awareness of what they're feeling and how out of balance they are. But there's always an external reason that they have to keep pushing, dragging themselves deeper into the illness or the pathology. So then I start walking it back and think, well, what part of their life are they locked up in? They have to take the kids to school. They have to, go to a part-time job. They have to pay the mortgage. They have, usually people say, I can't make the change you're asking me to make, or I can't comply with the change that you're asking me to make. And I'm not sure that it's that they have resistance to healing. I mean, I think there's a part of them that wants to heal, but there's a larger part of them that is in this life lock and doesn't know how to get out of it. Mm-hmm. And so they just do the same thing they've always done without taking a moment to stop and reflect and perceive differently and find new ways of being in the world and find new relationships and find better communication strategies and make different lifestyle medicine choices. And that's what you and I are doing with our clients, is we're opening doors for them that they didn't know existed, so they can get out of their life lock and start to make some sustainable changes. But it takes time, and it takes having a healthcare practitioner that's willing to hold your hand and show you through this series of doors to help you get unlocked from whatever it is that's causing your health behaviors to not be so great.
Yeah, absolutely. And there can be so many reasons there can be so many reasons why a person is resistant to it or sabotaging their healing. A lot of times it can be the ego, but there can be so many reasons for it. Or like I said earlier, they could fear who they're going to become if they are healed because they're so identified with this person. And also our society doesn't help, right? The system we live in the West here is where it's all about pushing, that you mentioned a moment ago. It's all about striving forward, and there's very little present moment reflection. It's all about thinking ahead and future thinking. very vata.
Yes, and pitta. We're always building
driven.
Something.
Spreading ourselves and driving forward, head down, yeah.
Exactly.
And this is why, for a lot of people, it takes an illness to really knock them on their feet and pull them out of this hamster wheel that they're in before they can go, okay, I guess I have to stop now because I can't go to work or I can't do my day-to-day things because I have this sickness. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes that for a person to stop. But I think for our work, Amy, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, for me, it's really important to meet the person where they are at. And I think I've mentioned this before in podcasts, is not to come in with my list of you have to do this, 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 and this, but rather go, okay, let's look at your lifestyle. Let's look at your routine. What time do you get up? What time do the kids have to be at school? What time, do you have to pick the kids up? Like all those little details. It's so important. And then fit the dinacharya, fit what lifestyle adjustments would work for that person, rather than giving them a prescription that goes, here, this is what I recommend, and now figure it out. But actually taking the person who's in a state of big change, and like you said, hold their hand and go, okay, let's figure this out together.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people that I meet with, they want to change. I'm kind of a specialist in autoimmune disease and yoga therapy, and they want to change, and they'll temporarily make the change and they'll start to feel better. But then as soon as they feel better, they'll start going back to their old ways. So they really, really need sustained assistance over time to keep the new lifestyle habits, the new lifestyle medicine in place, and not fall back to the old habits. So
right.
It takes a lot of work.
So what is it that you think, so they're feeling it in their body, they're feeling their perception, they have their direct perception of, oh, so this is what balance feels like, this is what it feels like what people after my cleanse, like this is what it feels like when everything's flowing, when I am full health, when I'm eliminating well, when I'm digesting well. So I'm going to interrupt myself here to tell you about a competition that's running right now until March 12th. So you have to move fast. This competition is for a free entry into my upcoming spring digestive reset cleanse, which starts March 29th. As you know, in Ayurveda, we cleanse seasonally, and this helps to prevent illness and disease and prevents the buildup of toxins in the body, which can lead to those seasonal allergies and flus and colds and congestion. So if you're interested in coming into this digestive reset cleanse, please click on the link in the show notes or go to my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com/group cleanse for all the details of the cleanse, which starts March 29th. And don't forget, if you're on time, to enter the competition, which closes March 12th. And the link is also in the show notes, or just go to my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com/competition. And now back to this podcast episode. So they have the feeling, which is key, right? They felt it in their own body. But what is it that you think draws them back then into those old habits?
Well, the samskaras, or the habitual patterns of the mind and the body, are powerful. Mm-hmm. It's, we're finding out with neuroscience now that the way the neural pathways fire is along these lines of habitual patterns. Okay. And so you can make a change and start to get the neural pathways to fire differently for a period of time. But the old pathway, the old samskara, is still there. It's still strong. I use a funny analogy. It's like the boyfriend that you loved, but you knew you weren't supposed to be with him. Mm-hmm. You find a fantastic man that, loves you and treats you well, but there's still this weird longing for the terrible ex.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Because that pattern of love for that person was very strong, and it's still inside you, and it might be easy to flip over and try again, right? So that's how I think of our health behavior change, that the old samskara has not died. It may have gone dormant, but it is still there waiting to pop its little head up at any time and say, hey, come over here, girl.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's so true. And good story to show how that works. I know a lot of us will probably relate with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the key is, first of all, awareness, right? Awareness of what's going on. And then doing the healing. But then post-healing, when you're feeling good, then it's necessary to have a period of supported disciplined time where you can continue these patterns, these new self-care practices day in, day out for a period of time. And I know there's been studies and research done on the length of time, and it can differ from 21 days to a month to, there's various studies out there which say that, it takes so long to create a habit. But I do think that it has to be post-healing, feeling good, and then going to a program where it's like, okay, so now let's put these habits, these new samskaras in place to replace the other ones.
Yeah, so when I help people recover from chronic migraines, it takes about 2 to 3 months to actually change the pattern and stop having the chronic migraines usually. And then after they're done having migraines and they're no longer experiencing them, or maybe very infrequently, then I say you must do the same lifestyle behavior for 3 more months, for 90 more days. And they're like, well, why do I have to continue? The migraines are gone. And I say, just do it. Trust me.
Right.
And the ones who don't, they come back and say they came back. And the ones who kind of instill the new samskara and imprint it deeply, they don't get the migraines back. And I think that's an example of all health behavior change. The first 21 to 40 days is going to be like climbing up a mountain, trying to get this new neuroplasticity thing going.
Yeah.
And then you have to go for another 90 days to really cement it.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And, I do the cleanses, and the cleanses are great because people at the end can, feel how balance and restored health in their own body. But then I was finding that a lot of people were reverting back to their old habits and then coming back going, oh my goodness, I'm out of balance again. And then that's when I brought in this Daily Habits for a Holistic Health program, because it was, okay, now we need to make sure you're continuing on this path to healing by repeating these dinacharya daily, and more education around why you're doing this. So there's, from an intellectual standpoint, understanding, okay, this is why you're doing this. This is the reason that these habits need to be in place in order to support you going forward.
One of my tricks that I've been using, I don't know if it's a trick or a technique or what it is, but before someone even engages in the process of, wanting health behavior change, they're in pre-contemplation, and we're talking about, hey, would you like to contemplate a change? I try to tie it into some very deep emotional goal that they have for themselves, which might be something like, look, if we get your knees feeling better, you can get on the floor and play with your grandchildren.
Right.
Or if you, say you have a type A pitta woman in her prime of life that's kicking butt in her work, you might say, look, if you, can do what we're asking you to do, you're going to feel so much better giving public talks in your beautiful suits on stage, right? And so tying it into something that person feels really strongly emotionally connected to.
Right. I totally agree. Yes.
As the carrot, like, come on, come along. We've got a carrot here.
Yeah, no, at the start of my program, I have people write a contract committing to themselves and write their intentions for it. So on those days when they had those dodgy, wobbly days, that I'm like, out your intentions, and why are you doing this? So I agree. Like there is it's important to understand intellectually what's going on, but then you have to have some deep driving force within.
And so let's talk about that, because I am very successful at getting people to set those intentions and tie it to, the deepest layer of our beings, our Vijnanamaya and Anandamaya layers. But then people forget. I wonder if there's some kind of technique that we could come up with where you carry a small stone around in your pocket. Someone recently gave me a beautiful tiny little rose quartz heart, like it's the size of my thumb. And I've been like carrying it in my pocket wherever I go. And whenever I need to remember my path and what I'm doing and why I'm doing it and why I'm going to, make a healthy choice now, right. I reach into my pocket and I feel my little, my little heart. And that, ties me to my mother, who recently passed from having heart problems that went unaddressed. And so if we can tie things in and use techniques like that we can carry with us and remind us when we have those wobbly days, I think that would be super, super helpful, because we always need to remember, oh yeah, I committed to this. This is what I truly want, more than this little thing in the moment, Yeah,
it's so true. And I think this is where the awareness is key, and where meditation and pranayama could be used to bring us into that present moment. When we're making a choice, or when we feel like, yes, we're having a wobbly, or this this is just not going right, I can feel myself going off the rails, is to take that time out, either doing breath work or in meditation, and really tune in with what's going on. And also being curious with what's going on inside. What is causing this wobbly today?
I love that. To have, I learned this in nonviolent communication training, where you have these competing needs within you, and you let the competing parts of you have a conversation, like, oh, you'd like to eat the cookies. And then the other part of you is like, no, I'd really like to feel comfortable in my body and not have pain from eating too much sugar. And then the cookie eater in you says, yes, but you deserve a reward. And you just let the conversation play out. Just close your eyes, sit comfortably, and let these two parts of you converse and argue a bit and see what happens. It's very, very interesting activity, actually.
Yeah, I like that. That is great. And yeah, it's interesting because you can see the battle going on inside of you, and you can, if you can step back from that and watch it and be curious about it, and then see, even further about, well, where is this voice that's saying, eat the cookie coming from? And where is this voice that's saying, don't eat it coming from, and then being able to bring that into your life in split moment decisions.
Well, first of all, I want to say, I read once that the art of a French woman staying slender is she only eats 3 bites of the cookie. So maybe they could come to a compromise.
There you go.
But I think what you just said is, for me, the crux of the issue for this entire conversation. And that is, how do you make a good decision in the moment when you're stressed out, you've had a hard day, you're exhausted, you don't have time to sit down and do a meditation practice or breathing practice. You don't have time to allow the different parts of you to have a conversation, and you're just on autopilot. And that's when the old samskaras come back and, attack you. So what can we do in that moment? What can we do in that moment? That's the hardest question, I think.
Yeah, for me, it will be literally, you do have time to take a breath. You do have time to stop, even for a minute or two, and just take a breath and just bring yourself to the present moment.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times when we're in situations like that, we're thinking about we're thinking ahead. We have a virtual story running our head of what could happen or what has happened in the past, and the ego is running that story about, oh, well, remember the last time you did this, what turned out, or, you know, oh, this could happen or that could happen in the future. But I think if we literally just take a few deep breaths and bring ourselves to the present moment, that could bring, again, back to that awareness.
Yeah, the slowing down of our lives and the checking in and knowing that there is 2 to 3 minutes. There's always 2 to 3 minutes.
There is.
Even if you arrive late to something, 2 to 3 minutes, there's still 2 to 3 minutes. And a lot of work can get done in 2 to 3 minutes. If you think about it, it's a long time.
Yeah.
That's many breaths.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I love what I was reading up on something else in Ayurveda in Dr. Ladd's book, and he was saying that in awareness there is no concentration. And because concentration, if you're really focused on something or if something's bothering you, it really narrows the mind and it creates a wall of resistance. Whereas in meditation, there is no concentration. It's about being open. It's like being in this vast ocean where all sorts of possibilities could come to fruition. I
love that. And so for me, what I heard you say in my mind was, you know, dharana or concentration is more like willpower. Like I'm going to focus on one thing and I'm going to make it, you know. But when you move into dhyanam, you know, the deeper stages of meditation, this spaciousness, this lightness comes, and then there's more possibilities. And it's not that you're struggling to have willpower, but rather you're opening up to new ways of being and new ways of doing. I love that.
Yeah, because if we're so stressed or if we're so focused on something that we don't have access to this flow in life, right? We talked about rasa earlier, how rasa permeates the whole body, that we don't have access to that intuition, that flow guiding us when we're so focused, when we're so stressed, when we're so in a moment of panic or in a moment of having a wobbly.
Well, or even in a moment of getting a job well done. You know, I love my work and I can go into the zone for 6 hours at a time and just be so focused and ignore all body signals of hunger and needing to go to the bathroom. I mean, even a positive thing like being in the zone is not, maybe not helpful to health behavior change.
Yeah, that's true. That's true too, because you can become exhausted from if you're too focused.
Right. Yeah. I love this idea of awareness and spaciousness in the present moment.
Yeah, and Dr. Ladd went on to say that in awareness, you look at everything. And for example, he said that in nature, that all is welcome. There's nothing rejected. So therefore you receive a tremendous energy. Because when you're concentrating, I guess you have, like he said, a wall of resistance. You're blocking out so much, and that takes energy to block out other things.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas if you have awareness, everything can just come and go. You're not attaching stories to anything. Therefore, you can look at everything, at the whole picture, because you're not getting caught up in any one thing.
I see this physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. That if we can just be present and allow the expansion and, like I said, the spaciousness and let everything be as it is in this moment, that's when I get energized. That's when I feel like, yes, I can overcome my health behavior challenges. Yes, there's source energy flowing through me that helps to direct me instead of my little pea brain that just wants to do what it's always done because that's all it knows.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think a way that we can start doing this and creating more awareness around this is in our meditation practice. Is getting up first thing every morning and doing some meditation, you know, that time in the morning where even if you have to set your alarm a little earlier, you can always make time. Maybe it might mean going to bed a little earlier the night before and getting up. But in meditation, this is where we can practice that reflex of bringing our mind to the present moment all the time. Because, we start meditating and perhaps we're counting our breath. And by, 3, we're gone off in another thought. But the reflex of pulling it back, I see that virtual story coming back to the present moment. I think it's really important for us to practice that, because this is essentially where we want to, live our lives, right, in this present moment. But we constantly have to have that discipline of bringing our mind back.
Right. And, I have these techniques that I teach people who have like OCD or any kind of addiction where the mind just takes over on autopilot and just refuses to be controlled. It just wants to do what it wants to do. And so there's a technique called krama where, if you're lifting your arms overhead, you instead break the movement into 3 parts, 33% lifting the arms, 33% lifting the arms all the way up. And then you break the breath and the movement into those parts.
Great. That's
and
great.
It doesn't seem like it would do much, but stopping at 33 with your breath and your body in different yoga postures, it cuts the autopilot thoughts of your mind. It is remarkable how well it works for addictions and things like OCD or chronic worrying or, even chronic pain it could work for, because it brings you into the present moment.
That's beautiful. So you could do it in your meditation. You could do it in your pranayama, right? In your breath work.
Yeah, right.
You could do it in your yoga practice. You could do it
right.
even if you're in a walk. If
yes.
you're doing mindful walking, right? Which is kind of similar. You bring, step 1, bring your knee up. Step 2, extend your leg. Step 3, put it down on the ground in front of you. Yeah. So you could, I think that's a wonderful tip for people out there, is how to bring your mind back to that awareness all the time. And I think we all need it nowadays, because our mind is lightning speed.
Right. And, that krama technique that I just mentioned, I think that's like the lasso. The mind is like a horse. It is running across the plains, and you lasso it and say, come back here, little horsey. We're going to take a different direction. And then once the horse is back, you go into the awareness and mindfulness of this present moment.
Exactly.
It's interesting because when I adopted yoga as a career, not just a healing practice for myself, I kind of got intellectual about it and started thinking, well, what does this mean? And judging that. And it was to the point where I almost felt that I was so much intellectualizing yoga that it couldn't be as healing for me anymore. And so I went to a Soto Zen meditation teacher, and he basically is teaching me exactly what you're saying, to just be here in the present moment with what is. Nothing more, nothing less, no future, no past, just here now. And so I did that for several months, and it was super, super healing on every layer of my system. And then it occurred to me, Amy, this is what your yoga practice was once. And this is what your yoga practice needs to get back to. You need to get out of your head and really get present in your yoga practice. Merge your Soto Zen and your yoga therapy. And since I did that, it's transformed my practice.
Wow. That's beautiful. And it is, I think we can all think of those times when we're in the complete present moment, complete awareness. Whether it's, for me, sometimes it was teaching yoga because I'm so focused on teaching, or if you're doing a dangerous activity, right? Sometimes that will bring you completely, because you can't think of anything else. We all have some situation we can relate to where we're in that absolute present moment awareness, and that's where we're in the flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the easiest way, if people out there are trying to think, well, when have I experienced that, is when was there a time in your life where you had fear, like you were doing something that was very scary, riding a bicycle downhill really fast, many different situations where fear can come up. But that is a kind of typical situation where we're completely in the present and have complete awareness.
This is how we heal. This process of learning to tie your mind down and de-link from whatever it is that's causing you suffering. And then once you get focused on the commitment to being here now, and then allow that to be spacious and light and kind of expand you, that's the process of healing. Mm-hmm. Whether you have a problem with overeating or smoking or not exercising, or you're, attached to your lupus or your, asthma or your heart disease, when you've developed that identity that you are your illness, it's the same process. What we're talking about is the same process. Can you stop and get present and feel and be and allow the awareness to flow into you? Mm-hmm. If you can do that, healing will happen over time. You just do it and do it and do it and do it. And maybe you eat the cookie and you try it again the next day. Right. And then you have another cookie and you try it again the next day. You just keep plugging away until one day the new samskara takes root, and then you start adding days together, and then you start reinforcing it, and voila, 6 months later, you're a new person.
Exactly. And I do think that for people who are very entrenched in this identity of suffering, that support is necessary.
Yes, 100%. I think most of us need support because we need hope. When you've tried to lose weight 17 times and you're trying your 18th time, there's really no hope. It's just a matter of when are you going to fail. Right. But you need someone to give you intellectual hope that this is different. You need someone to give you hope for the heart that I'm here for you. I support you. When you have a bad day, I'm going to be here to help pick you up. Right? So just having that hope that you actually can make a change. It's super important. We know this from the Jewish concentration camps, that the people who were able to maintain any sense of hope were the ones who fared better in that horrible, horrible situation.
Yeah, my goodness. So I think for anybody out there feeling that, that they're in this hole right now and they're feeling that they're totally consumed with the suffering or illness, be it physical or mental, or in a situation they can't get out of, I do feel it's important to reach out for help and to get that support and that hope like Amy's talking about. And then with time, once you've been shown the way, somebody's pulling you out, showing you the way, and then giving you guidance, it will take discipline. But once you're on that path and once you have that momentum going of discipline, that it gets easier and easier. But you do need that support to start with. And Amy, what I'd like to talk about now is for those people who are listening to this and, they're on their healing journey, but there's others close to them who are suffering. What can they do in that situation where the person who, if you're watching somebody suffering and what will be good for them, but they're not open to it, what should you do in that case?
Well, if anybody is in a relationship has this going on right now, because this is the state of being connected to someone you love, right? Yeah. So all I can tell you is from my personal experience. I have been with my husband for 17 years, and he had some, what I consider pretty significant, terrible health choices early on in our relationship. And number one, I had to decide what I was willing to tolerate and wasn't willing to tolerate, and let him know that, hey, here's my boundary. You can do what you want to your own body, but here's my boundary. For example, don't smoke in front of me, that kind of thing. So there's the boundary setting where you take care of you first. I think that's, put your mask on before you help anyone else. Right. And then I think the second part is working on our own judgment about whatever it is that they're doing. Yeah. Like if I'm upset that he's smoking, even though he's respecting my boundary and not doing it around me, I could have a lot of judgment about that, right? So then I have to work through my judgment, and I usually can do that through looking at my own health behavior challenges that I have not mastered, such as eating sugar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so when I do that internal work of, okay, I have my own little thing going on here. How about I clean up my side of the fence before I try to clean up his yard?
Yes.
And so now it's been 17 years, and he quit smoking, but I'm still eating sugar. So somehow, and he has some judgments about my sugar eating, right?
Okay.
So
yeah,
I just think it's an inside job.
It definitely is an inside job. And I agree with you that if, again, this curiosity, if something, a habit or something another person is doing is triggering you, there's something for you to learn from that, because that's triggering something within you.
Right. And I'm not saying there's not non-negotiables. I mean, part of my setting a boundary to him was I really don't want to be married to a smoker.
Right.
I don't even want to be in a long-term committed relationship with a smoker. So I'm not giving you an ultimatum. I'm just letting you know that that's one of my boundaries. Yeah. And I love you. Right. I think we have a future together. And I also need you to know that long-term, that's not what I envisioned for myself. Yeah. So there was no date. There was no ultimatums. It was just a realization that that's my boundary. And, it took him a few months, but one day he just stopped and he never picked up a cigarette again. And he made the decision from the inside out.
Yeah. And I think that's important. Because if you're going to nag somebody, or you're going to continually remind them of their challenges or their weakness or their faults, that's not going to work. So I think having compassion for the other person, for their suffering, noticing what that is triggering in you, and like Amy did, say what your boundaries are and what you're willing to accept and not accept.
Yeah, and then I do think we have to give some time to adjust, because these samskaras are deep. Addictions are deep. Yeah. I mean, thank goodness he hasn't thrown me out 17 years later, right? He's still watching me work with it and be present with it and fall back and move forward.
Yeah. So. Yeah, it is, and compassion comes into it here. And we always have to remember that everybody's on their own healing journey, and we can just focus on ourselves and also protect ourselves. But having compassion for others is so important, because there is that post healing feeling like you just want to tell everybody, and you want to be out there going, you should do this.
Right.
You should stop doing that. And that is often not digested very well by the person you're preaching to. So it is important to allow them on their journey. Like Amy said, the samskaras have run very deep, and when they're ready, they will come to you. But just continue doing your thing, continue and see why their actions are triggering you, because I think there's something for you to learn. But have compassion and just focus on yourself.
Yeah, and I had a family member that had a drug addiction, and so for an entire year, I got a codependency anonymous coach that I talked to every morning to help me deal with this family member. And I learned so much. I mean, Codependency Anonymous is kind of like the big book, and it's all the stuff around Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, but it's the addiction of being codependent. That's what CODA is, right? So I'm not working on my alcoholism or my drug addiction. I'm working on my addiction to trying to control everybody and judge everybody and want everybody to, follow my rules.
Right.
That was one of the most profound years of my life. Wow. I have to tell you, to go through that program and learn to love with detachment and let go of my control issues, basically.
Yeah. What a learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's a lot of letting go.
Oh, it is. When you have a young person who's doing drugs
Yes.
and you're worried they might die any day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big letting go when you love that person, for sure.
I can imagine that was a big lessons to be learned in that program.
Yeah, and I think that goes with any time we want our partner or a child or a parent to do something that they're, we think they should do for their healing, and they're not doing it. I would just suggest to back off and look inward.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So true, because it is triggering something inside.
Well, and you love them. You don't want them to die because they have diabetes or drug addiction. I mean, I get it. But ultimately it's their life, their path, their choice.
Right. Yeah, I have someone close to me now that it's really hard to watch them as they're declining, degenerating, but they're just not willing to change their habits. And, of course, I know that just by changing simple foods and lifestyle that it could help them so much, but they're degenerating fast. And I've had to just let go. It's like, I'm here if you need help, but this is your life.
Right.
So it can be so challenging to do that.
And even letting go of the internal judgment of it all.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like that's the hardest part. I can keep my mouth shut, but energetically I'm walking around with judgment, Yeah. But how do I let go of judgment and learn to trust the higher power to take care of that person and guide that person as they need to be guided in this life?
Yeah. And maybe it is their life this is part of their life is to suffer from this. Even that's a judgment, you see. But maybe this is their life to degenerate to the point where they won't recover.
Yeah, so absolutely.
That's something that I think that has to be accepted too.
Yep.
So,
when I started studying yoga and learned about the ancestral influences, the birth constitution, the early childhood experiences. We have, Sanskrit names for all of this, the Mahat and the Svabhava and the Vasanas. And when I learned all of that Indian philosophy, I understood why one person can't control another or one person can't demand health behavior change. There's so much happening in that human being that has nothing to do with us that they're going to have to figure out on their own.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's so much. Just like you said, from the conception, right? From conception, there's a matrix laid down, and it's in the rasa, it's in the body, but also karma, and also generational stuff coming through.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's a big lesson for us all to learn, is to focus on our well-being, focus on our health. Practice non-judgment, which is very challenging.
Towards ourselves and towards others.
Towards ourselves and others. And and really a letting go. But it all comes back to always bring yourself back to that present moment awareness. And even though it's a simple thing to say, bring yourself back to that present moment awareness, it's hard to do. But we also always have to have that reminder, right? Or the present moment, bring myself back, take a breath. And I think the breath is the easiest way to do it, because we don't need anything external to do that. That literally just take a deep breath anytime you're triggered, anytime you see yourself having a wobbly or stress coming in, just take a breath and just go present moment.
Well, and I think the biggest thing I learned in talking to you today was we always have 2 to 3 minutes to do that.
Yeah.
Like I sometimes think, I don't have that kind of time to stop. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Anything can wait for 2 minutes.
Yeah. And you're breathing anyway. You're just going to bring your awareness to it. So,
right.
That's all. And so we will leave it there today. I think that's a good place to end it. So for you out there, just bring your awareness to that breath, even for 2-3 deep breaths. Bring that awareness, and that's the key.
Yeah.
The key to this resistance that we feel within us. And have compassion. self-compassion, have compassion for others, because it's all a journey we're on.
Absolutely.
Right. All right, Amy, thank you so much. Another great conversation with you. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Just a reminder that Spring Cleanse is happening March 29th and the competition is running until March 12th. So check out the link in the show notes. Also join us over at the Elements of Ayurveda podcast Facebook group so we can support each other over there. And if you would like to become a patron of the show, I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes here where you can become an Elements of Ayurveda podcast supporter. Take good care of yourself, be well, and ciao for now.